this session of the day because the last one, and we have just the right man to finish this. Gene, we were just chatting behind. He's the co-founder and CEO of Treadle, and he has a nice presentation to go with what we will actually blend this whole conversation on AI and innovation. And very happy to have you. And since you already have figured out screen share, I'll leave the word to you. And if you see me back coming with my hat on the video, it means like we have to wrap, but you have 20 minutes clear, so go for it.
All right, very good. You hear me fine? You see my screen?
All works perfect.
Very good. So my talk is about how do you make data available for AI to enable innovation worldwide. And I emphasize innovation worldwide. We'll talk about that in a second. All right. Everything that I'm going to be talking today about is open source. You can go to github.com/Treadle, find everything on the front end or the back end, and you can collaborate, submit issues. So this is a collaboration space. And what's important, the previous panel was discussing investment into technologies that are available, that are democratizing access to high-end stuff that usually was just in Silicon Valley. Now, this is also open source, so you can participate, and I invite you to start the participation. Okay, the point I want to make today is about the next stage in personal computing. So we had PCs appear on the scene at about 84, 85. We know the story of Microsoft and their MS-DOS and Windows, how it allowed hundreds of thousands of manufacturers to produce PCs for us around the world, in every corner of the world. And then Apple invented iPhone, and 2 years after, the world has started building around Android. And again, the manufacturers that we've never seen before started building phones. We have major manufacturers today out of China and many other countries that didn't exist prior to Android. Android as an operating system for personal computing or mobile devices enabled that. So what's next? Now we are 10 years into personal computing on personal movable mobile devices. We believe that the next stage of personal computing is my cloud. Today, when we think about the cloud, businesses are using cloud. Majority of businesses are moving towards the cloud, or have already moved to the cloud. But can we, individuals, access the cloud today unless we're using it via some kind of application? The answer is no, and we'll show you how it will become possible. Today, in a third generation cloud that we use today, all the infrastructure in the cloud is built for very high density multi-tenancy. That means everyone is using the same pipes, the same file system, the same databases, the same object store. Obviously, the cloud provider is making it all sliced and diced in such a way that we can see only our own piece. But this infrastructure enables building more density on the apps level, and this is not so good. So on the apps level, we see condensation of personal data in the hands of app providers. We obviously know about Google, Facebook, and others, but all of the apps today are built this way. All of the cloud apps are built as SaaS, software as a service, on the shared infrastructure, and further concentrating everyone into one set of hands of the provider of the app. No wonder that we have it exploding over and over again, because the data are sitting in the hands of the application developer. We never had things like this before. When we, in the first era of personal computing, had our own personal PCs on our desktops, the applications that worked on those data, they actually did not take data away from us. Now, when I installed the QuickBooks, for example, that data was mine. When I now use in my company QuickBooks Online, that data is in QuickBooks and into it. They have my data and millions of other businesses. So this is not healthy. It It is convenient for us, but this is not healthy. It's prone to data breaches, and we see them every day. We need a personal infrastructure. The personal infrastructure that will allow us to create a boundary around our personal data, but in the cloud, giving us both the beauty of two worlds, the personal computing, and the elasticity of the cloud. And now, when data is in our hands, we can completely change how AI is working with that data. We can make it a visiting AI. And here's the difference. When we submit our data from Fitbit devices, from our cameras, from the home surveillance units, from the smart locks, all of that data goes to some company, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Apple, whether it's Google, it goes to them or some other company that provides that capability. They train the AI, their AI developers can work on it, but everyone else, all other innovators around the world are shut out. What if we can create a system where AI would be coming to our data, train itself on our data, but never take away our data? So we'd never share our data, actually. And this is the concept of visiting AI. And in researchers and developer circle, that is called the federated AI. Interestingly, the first federated AI was developed by Google, and it is now operating practically every Android and is being trained on our keystrokes on the Gboard, Google's keyboard implementation, so that it can give you autocorrect and other features. It is insane to give all the keystrokes to Google. Google understands that, and that's why they created an AI that visits your phone, trains on it, but doesn't take your keystrokes away to the center. And this is the future of our AI, and this is how we can make AI innovators around the world get access to data, because data is oil. Data is oil of today. And whoever has access to data, whoever can train the AI, they can go to market. Whoever cannot is shut out from the market. That's hence the title of this talk. If we build an infrastructure that would allow AI to come to our data without extracting that data, then AI developers will get access to sensors on our phones, sensors on our watches, on our Fitbits and other devices from our homes, from our cars, without extracting that data. Now we can trust AI to work on our data without taking it away from us. And now all kinds of applications that we today may not trust become possible. One of those applications is the one that we are working on right now. It's called eKYC, very sensitive piece of data. That's the personal sensitive data necessary to acquire an account in a bank or apply for a loan. But other types of data, health data, home sensors data, surveillance inside your home or at the smart lock. You probably have heard stories that a Ring device that with a video camera that Amazon allows you to install at your front door actually submitted that data to Amazon, submits that data to Amazon, and police had access to it. So we don't want to create situations where our data, and very sensitive data, who comes to our home, gets into the hands of private institutions and the governments without us knowing that this is happening. Personal cloud infrastructure is the way to change that. How do we come to this idea? So we are working on the eKYC product for 5 years right now. And in eKYC, it's very, very important to have privacy because data is sensitive. So we work with a lot of regulators around the world and the financial institutions to establish a platform where the personal data is on the device, and they, by necessity, by law, have to be submitted to the bank. And they sit in the bank in what we call Tradle MyCloud. Why do we call it MyCloud? Because it is run by the bank and only the bank sees the data. Tradle does not. Other vendors do not. So we segregated the data already. But personal data managed by a person is on the device. Device is can be lost, can be broken. So we need something more solid behind it. We need all of that data in the personal cloud. The other thing that we understand perfectly is that identity is the enabler for thousands of different apps. And we've seen it over and over again. We've seen it with WeChat in China. The major application platform is actually an alternative to app stores, Google's and Apple's app stores, because it has millions of apps already in it. And those apps, they're enabled by the identity that WeChat is providing. But we also have seen it in the public sector space. In Estonia, they have created a foundation for digital identity, and from that, 1,000 different apps were spawned. So how do you identify yourself remotely? And this is very important in our situation right now with the COVID-19. A lot of different services become unavailable if you cannot step into the office. So with the remote identification that we have created and cleared with the regulators in a couple of dozen countries already, and working with the within the forums of regulators from all over the world, including presentation to regulators at FATF meetings 2 years in a row in front of all of the regulators, we've proven that you can identify a person with the same level of assurance or more using remote identification with IDs that can be IDs from any country, 8,000 different IDs with the interfaces in any kind of language that you can find on the planet, or obviously in the majority of languages that is found on the planet. With the digital signatures and signatures on screen. That is important because in many countries the digital signature law is not yet pervasive, not yet implemented, and with an interface that is actually very similar to WeChat, to WhatsApp and other messaging applications, but is suited for transactions, suited for building applications, suited for that data to be collected in a trusted way on a mobile device and then sent to the personal cloud. So when AI is coming to my personal cloud, how can I trust my data? And the answer is blockchain. And you've seen a lot of presentations yesterday on the blockchain topic. This one ties those two things together. AI, or visiting AI, federated AI, and the blockchain. Why does the AI need to trust data? It needs to know that data hasn't been massaged so that it can make decisions. Those decisions may have legal implications. So it needs to trust the data, especially in health, in finance, it may have in any other regulated industry. In public sector, it has legal implications. So you have to give AI or developer of AI model assurance that data is real. How do you do that? We use our method that we're using today for KYC. You digitize data on the front end, on the mobile device or desktop, then you send it to a financial institution. That's what we do today. That financial institution uses digital policy and tooling for that we provide to it to communicate with the customer. And then the customer can give that same data to another financial institution using AI to process that data, to massage that data. And we use the data AI in 7 different areas in our app today. But the most important part is that data can be trusted because when it was collected by one financial institution, it was sealed on a blockchain so that when the customer gives that data to another financial institution, that data can be verified over the blockchain. And that's the beauty of connecting AI and the blockchain. AI now can trust the data. But the key point that I will come back over and over too that customer owns the data, not the vendor, not the application developer, because this is not good. Centralizing data in the hands of one application developer is counterproductive and doesn't facilitate AI innovation. And besides, it violates data residency. In many parts of the world, the governments are not allowing anymore for data to leave the country. So if data is in a data center or the cloud provider that is on the other side of the world, that's not good. Data needs to be in a local data center. So the model of centralizing data, because of data residency, because the privacy has blown up many times, as we've seen. So instead, we need to build, and Tradle has built, such an infrastructure where the data sits only in the hands of bank, fintech, law firm, SME, and now we're building the one for the personal cloud. So data sits in the cloud, but isolated, fully enclosed for the purposes of the use of the owner of the data. Yet interoperability still enabled. The trust in the data is enabled by DLT, the ledger technology, or another way called the blockchain. So the summary of what I just shared with you is, when we go to the personal cloud, and AI can trust that cloud because of the blockchain, and people can trust that cloud because it's personal, now we have created a foundation for innovation for everyone. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of developers can now develop AI models and start training them on the personal cloud of individuals without seeing that data. Only AI comes to that data, trains itself, goes away with a trained model, but without taking away the data. So this is the foundation for massive innovation in AI. It is enabled by personal cloud and the blockchain. It's all open source. You can go to this website and you can see all the development that's done in the open, and we invite everyone to come and work on this with us. Thank you.
Perfect. Great timing. So one thing I'm curious of is, how do you see the world of open innovation integrating and working closely with mostly financially driven investors and ecosystems? How will those two worlds collide and maybe even collaborate?
Yes. The simple answer to this question is, recently, last year, IBM bought Red Hat, the premier open source company,
and GitHub, Microsoft, and GitHub,
for billions of dollars, right? Red Hat actually is open source. GitHub itself is not. It enables open source development, but GitHub was itself not open source. But Red Hat is open source company. It has built a multi-billion-dollar business, was purchased by IBM, and still is sold to the enterprises. So they figured out the answer to this question. And there are a couple of answers to this question. One is, you don't have to sell the software. You can sell support, you can sell priority development, you can sell consulting how to deploy that software, customization. You can sell a lot of things around the base software. Software that is open source can be evaluated by independent security experts. All of the blockchain, practically all of the blockchain software is open source today, and that enables us collectively to trust it. That's why we're saying that the personal cloud, where AI is going to work, also needs to be open source, so that we, individuals, can trust that the data is handled properly, was reviewed and continuously being reviewed by security experts, yet at the same time provides the value. And me, as a user that is buying services provided by the open source, For me, it's no difference, right? It's better that it is open source. So I will pay for services, not for software.
Yeah. So I think that was. I mean, I was living in the States for a while in Silicon Valley, and there's always this divide, like the hippie culture, you might still say, is open source impact sharing and growing together as a collective, and then you have these all for-profit driven startups and VCs and ecosystems, and how that and like large corporations are making a lot of money, and nobody got fired from any company because they worked with IBM, and that's kind of the famous saying. But now going back, like IBM doing that kind of move, kind of was really interesting even in the open source community. A lot of people criticized it, but like the reason that you just described is actually it makes everything a lot better in terms of accessing information, in terms of sharing information, in terms of utilizing the know-how. I hope we can see that more.
And we've
Like,
seen that actually in Android, right? 10 years
yeah, yeah,
ago, what Google used is Linux kernel. They built a system on top that's also
yeah,
open source, and only applications that it built on top, like maps and others,
yeah,
are
yeah,
not
everything.
open source. But the operating system is fully
Infrastructure.
open source. Infrastructure
Yeah.
is open source. Infrastructure has to be open source so that other people can innovate around it. And that's how personal computing is going to another stage. The previous stage was open source. The next stage, personal cloud, will be open source as well.
One good question from actually an intern of ours is how do you mitigate the security aspects when you have an open source system? How do you mitigate the risks?
Hmm. Obviously, when your sources are not proprietary, people can look at them. They can discover faults in those sources. But at the same time, million eyes are looking at those sources. So the million eyes are discovering those faults. Million eyes are suggesting changes in those sources. So in that sense, it has so much more scrutiny than the proprietary software, and the benefits outweigh the possibility of someone discovering someone with a nefarious intent, discovering it earlier than everyone else and exploiting it.
I think the maybe a follow-up question, maybe this is the last one of the day, and this is the last question I'll have as the MC, is I think there is this risk mitigation, and there's like how are you going to find and ensure your whole system based on million eyes? You can mitigate risk assuming you have many people looking into it, but from an application perspective, I think it's still we need a lot more advocacy. We need a lot of education to large entities and corporations. They don't see the risk mitigated with that million eyes. They actually see more risk when you have million eyes.
That is true. At the same time, open source is the mainstream deployment
Yeah,
the platform for enterprises. The everyone is running in the cloud, and cloud is built on Linux, and Linux is open source.
yeah.
Everyone is running. 80% of the world is running on Android. Android is open source. So this question has been raised and has been answered.
Yeah. Well, I hope we see more entities, large corporations whose main job is not software, whose main job is to actually use software to deliver services, will take a broader look and more positive perspective on open source. But with that, Gene, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to hear from you, to
Thank
learn
you.
from you. And we're actually done. Like this is the last session of today. And I just want to do a little quick wrap up and go through my notes that I took. Partially unreadable, but I'll try to remember with my short-term memory. So we started today with Riyadh from WeWork, and I already started tweeting about it. By the way, you can find me on Mr. Ozan Sönmez. I'll be tweeting about my perspectives right after this. So we start from WeWork and seeing how enterprises are shifting their understanding of space and understanding of work environments, and work from home will not solve all our problems. And maybe WeWork can provide a solution. We went then to Serhi, the CTO of InnoHub, and looked into the good and the bad of AI in applications, especially on from cameras. Like, how can cameras get smarter to our best advantage? We then moved to Ahmed, who took us from financial perspective on what are the best tools to use in AI, blend them. We moved to Marta, who had a really passionate talk about multiple sectors being impacted with AI and technology, but most importantly, that AI and technology should be utilized in creating impact and performance. Talent could be developed, and it's although there is a digital divide, we need to do better in training people to get things done faster. We were joined by Max after that from Bots Crew. Max gave us an overview of how things have evolved in the chatbot space and how things will be moving forward, and gave us really practical tips as a startup or as a company to look into chatbots. We moved to a good friend of mine, Philip from Magnet, who actually put together a lot of time and effort and is changing the landscape of the venture market in emerging economies like Middle East, Pakistan, and now in Turkey. And enabling transparency will be key to bring a more inclusive venture investment market and startup market in those countries as well. We were joined by multiple people led by Vijay, Ion, Jesus, Shannon, Vitaly. They talked about how governments are looking into AI. Unfortunately, most governments are like 10 years behind their corporate partners, but the applications that were discussed was really hopeful in that note that some countries, cities mostly, are using AI for the better of their citizens and inhabitants. We were joined by Inna and the founder of Novinano. Inna gave us a good perspective on how AI and legal can meet and differentiate in terms of applications. How can we mitigate risks through AI, and how can we actually manage AI's own risk? We were then accompanied by Francisco from BCG, and he was really clear on where this post-COVID world can go. Being hopeful is good, and being driven to create impact is also important. And I hope we can get to where he visions us as being efficient to manage this whole crisis and perform the organizational transformation that governments, cities, and institutions need. Semyon and I had a really nice conversation. It was really fun to hear his perspective on one-way ventures and his experience with the MIT's Blackjack team. But we really had a good conversation in terms of understanding what is the thesis of one-way ventures and how it's important into the general scope of the VC world. I had the pleasure to host friends, Ahmed, Mona, Sharif, and new friends Aaron, Keys, and Kieno to talk about AI being used in what is AI when it's pitched to startups, which is usually not what it seems, and how we can actually build use cases around AI. I was very happy to hear what UNICEF Ventures and Innovation Fund were doing in terms of promoting SDG implications in multiple countries with a really unique approach. And lastly, we had Gene to talk about open source and how we can actually utilize AI open source into solving most of our problems. So that's a good wrap. My name is Ozan Sönmez. I'm the head of scaling for Global Innovation Catalyst, and I'm the founder of YellowX Ventures. We help companies and individuals get better in multiple operations, especially for startups to get better in pitching. We're building a youth entrepreneurship training platform. So if those of you are interested, please reach out. We're not using AI yet, but who knows? And you can find me on Mr. Ozan Sönmez on Twitter. And for those of you who remained, who joined, who came back and went forth, and who are already watching this live recording published somewhere else, enjoy your day, the rest of your days, and have a good event. Thank you, Anna. Thank you all, InnoHub team, and take care.